So, basically, I'm in August launching a new show. It's going to be called very inventively The Michael Brooks Show.
Wow. How long did that take you to come up with?
Exactly. A really long time because first you go through like a million, like, yeah, and none of them work. And then at a certain point in like a state of exhaustion and trying to like come up with like clever inversions of like Vibes Cartel songs, you're just like, Michael Brooks Show.
I can't lie, man. I'm a sucker for Nation of Islam Obama.
Me too.
The arc of history bends towards Sharia. Yes. Sign me up for that, please.
What problem would you, everything you're building here right now, right? Do you want the government to tell you how to do all these things and all the regulations that you got to have your electric thing this far from this and like all of
the regulations like that for construction are important though. You do have to make sure that people don't do stupid shit. But sure generally, you don't have a power lines near a water line. There's a lot of.
But I would put most of that on the builders, though. They want to build things that are good. Now I get it.
That's not true. Listen, people
people are going to build
corners all the time. Like you have to have regulations when it comes to construction methods, or people are going to get fucked.
They cut corners when there are regulations anyway.
They do. They would cut a lot more if there weren't regulations.
I'm not totally.
You go to third world countries and look at construction methods. They're fucking dangerous.
Yeah.
That's why schools collapse on kids in foreign countries sometimes.
You know, it's so silly to even, unfortunately, to have to talk about these little nonsensical things because I like talking about ideas, not about people.
I can't
asked for more money.
I can't.
That's number one. I left. I told them.
I can't believe he must not watch the critics, right? Because if someone calls me out, rightfully so, for using some lame, tired argument, then I would be hyper aware of it and I wouldn't use that argument anymore. But he's still doing it. He's still saying ideas. I just want to talk about ideas. What are your ideas? I want to know what his ideas are.
Well, I can't.
My brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Hit us again. Come on, go.
I have to say that my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
When did he say that? Was that recent?
That was
high-level important ideas.
It was within the last year, and it was referring to a live event he did with the Brett and Eric Weinstein.
That's such an incredible concept.
Nothing to worry about at all. Just relax.
Just relax, Dave.
Just ideas.
Just ideas.
Just rational thought.
Just rational thought, Dave.
Think rationally.
Think rationally. Ooh, mean feminists on college campuses not thinking rationally.
He's sitting there in complete boredom, just like, yeah, well, you know, there was Jacob Javits, and there was moderates, and there was Jesus Christ, he's a nice kid, but he's not the brightest. And all of a sudden, wait, the Angels got Hernandez.
What is your opinion on Brazilian Prime Minister Bolsonaro regarding?
Can you just play that again? Can we just do that again?
What is your opinion on Brazilian Prime Minister Bolsonaro regarding? Oops, there's a lot of things moving here.
Bolsonaro.
What is your opinion on Brazilian Prime Minister Bolsonaro?
See, it's pretty good.
All right, this is Movie Night Extravaganza. I'm here joined by a whole cast of collaborators, of course, as always, John Ross, J. Andrew World, and we have Kenzo, and we have Karthik, and hopefully Varn will be joining us at some point. He might have fallen asleep again. I don't know. I mean, I said what time we were going to be doing this, but it's all right. So yeah, I wanted to start with that series of Michael clips. I kind of feel bad that those are all the first ones because the last couple months that he was doing TMBS, he really wanted to move away from like doing as much dunking as he was doing because he was feeling a lot more spiritual and empathetic, and he felt like maybe that was a dead end. And now that he had written the Against the Web book, that maybe it was time to start moving towards a lot more healing and empathetic and solidaristic content. But god damn it, his dunking is classic.
It is.
So I don't know. Do any of you guys have any thoughts on anything with Michael and TMBS, and really just how what a big impact Michael and that show have really had on everything? I feel like from the day he started it, but I mean, especially since his passing, it seems like the show splintered off into so many different things, and like I know Andy and I wouldn't be working on GTAA if it wasn't for if it wasn't for Ben deciding that Michael had pushed him towards that, and he followed through on it, and Left Reckoning obviously exists because of it, and really just everything Jacobin's done as in the form of video content, I mean, has been because Michael was pushing Boschkar towards making video content, which is something that he wouldn't have necessarily done. There was barely any followers on the Jacobin YouTube channel. I remember when Michael first asked if I wanted to work doing editing on it. I was looking at it before they had done any weekends content, and there was 30 30 or 100 subscribers, and they were only posting long videos of lectures that had taken place at different it wasn't it wasn't content, and it definitely wasn't shows. So it really feels like the entire left media sphere, at least the good ones, not the Jimmy Dore type bullshit. Well, even some there's even one or two I don't necessarily care for that much. That the people that started it were so inspired by Michael's friendship and TMBS that they started so it's really splintered off in all these different directions, and I someone you really have to pay so much tribute to in any of these spaces.
Yeah, I think with Michael, especially towards the end of the content that he was creating, he was forcing us all to step up our game. And I think that's when those distinctions were made between the Jimmy Dores of the world and what, I hope I'm part of, which is not that, but Michael was really into elevating what we were doing to the point of professionalism, and being very accountable to his audience, to make us really dig deeper in our questions and not just have on people to dunk later, but he had that nice balance too, where he'd have some fun episodes. He'd have someone on Stavros Halkias and be very funny and actually have a good political conversation with him. And I think that that is a good model for us now, where we're living in this time where I'm not gonna say the phrase, but if you're seen around certain people, other people get a moral panic around it. And Michael didn't seem to care, but also he wasn't a dick about it either. He's just I'm going to have these people on. We're going to have interesting conversations. If you have a problem with it, I'm just going to kind of ignore you. And
it was really whatever. I mean, if he respected their work.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Because he had Glenn Greenwald on as much as he did, and Glenn Greenwald, I think, blurbed his book and everything. They were close friends because the whole Lula and Brazil issue was so close to his heart, which Glenn Greenwald really did some amazing did some amazing reporting on, and I don't think that those stories would have been uncovered without him. In terms of Operation Car Wash and everything, being outed as a state a U.S. state operation that was with the Bolsonaro government. So it feels like I don't know. I guess I'd wonder. I'd wonder how long everyone would It feels like the left really fractured as soon as Bernie dropped out, and we had a goal that we were all working towards, and whatever whatever work. I don't know. It all kind of stopped, and then obviously the incentives take account, which is like the media, any kind of media, incentivizes this like personality clash on social media. And sorry, I'm messaging Varn the link at the same time, so I was trying to do that while I was talking. But so that's it's incentivized by these personality clashes, which don't actually matter for politics, but suddenly, as soon as Bernie drops out and everyone's not working towards the same goal or working towards a goal, even if ideally they are, it starts being like this career ladder that people have to like fight for this space, because they no longer see it as like a circuit that they go on each other's shows and really have that goal. They start seeing it as competition the same way the rest of the media is. And it's really sad to see that. And I know Michael was trying to fight against that by really like building an apparatus that everybody was working towards. And I remember feeling so good about like working with him, because it felt like it wasn't something tearing other people down. It was something building so many people up.
It's cool that you have the This Is Revolution hat on, because I have to say that's like that show is probably that and Kenzo's show are two shows that I think are like kind of I mean, of course there's the Give Them an Argument that's come out in kind of the place of the Michael Brooks show after Michael Brooks show ended. But I think one of the things that distinguished Michael from anybody else was not only the international focus that he had, but also how seriously he took the idea of political education, which is why I kind of gave a shout out to This Is Revolution, because like both Pascal and Jason also care about the idea of political education and see that as the goal rather than anything else. Like it's not dunking, it's not, having one over another person, but to actually inform the electorate about what's up, or whatever his perspective was, whatever he felt, he needed the people to know. And he was very thorough about it, I felt like, and even like I'm grateful to have had the chance to very briefly interact with him. And I read his book. I regret the fact that I never got to review it, which is what basically got me to read the book in the first place. I wish that I had the chance to write something for a publication and had more people read it. But that book was, I think, the idea of cosmopolitan socialism that he introduced as a concept. I feel like it needs to catch on more. It has the potential to be something in American culture, in worldwide culture as well, whatever form of international, culture we might have. But yeah, I definitely think that he put forth ideas and outlooks that I don't think anyone else kind of brought to the table.
Yeah, and really created like this. I mean, I want to call it a circuit, because that's kind of what it is. Like all of these media personalities that started going on each other's shows, and if you have something to promote, all of a sudden all these shows will have you on and interview you about it. And I mean, Michael was building it up just as like Chapo was kind of building it up. I mean, a little more controversially, but like just shows like that Majority Report, which Michael had like a really big hand, obviously, in booking people that he respected. Like, so it's suddenly it wasn't just like you release something and like maybe Jack would write about it or something, and like and like maybe somebody on Twitter would write about it. Like suddenly, the same way like establishment media has, there was suddenly a circuit that you could really like promote your work on, and people could promote each other in a way that didn't like set up a careerist competition. Like,
yeah, clout mutual aid.
Yeah. Varn, do you have anything to say about Michael? Your mic is not connected.
You're muted.
Well, while he's doing that, I'm just going to say, without Michael, nobody is here to remind me that that I shouldn't be drawing cartoons of Richard Wolff decapitating David Griscom.
Remember the video someone said in that it was a Goodfellas clip, I think, or no, the Casino clip. Casino clip
Yes.
with Joe Pesci and the pen, and he made that with David Griscom and David Harvey and Richard Wolff, all both beating the shit out of David Griscom.
Oh, poor David.
Yeah.
I guess I'll take my turn. Reading Michael's book a year ago kind of pushed me much further to the left than I already was. I consider myself a Dem Soc in training, Democratic Socialist in training. So I owe a lot of that to Michael and to the circle of people like the Majority Report, Chapo, Ben, for kind of being able to listen rather than just be like dismissive, as some moderate liberals would do. So I owe a real big debt of gratitude to MJB, as I call him. Wherever he is, we miss him.
You're still muted. There's a strain of I guess Michael's what I'd call spirituality and like almost like hippie empathy, hippie spirituality that he kind of was cultivating towards the end that aligns really well with like what I grew up around, because my parents, like, or at least my dad, meditates constantly. Like, he goes to meditation retreats. When I was a kid, like my parents were into like Eastern religion in general. Like, my grandfather was really into learning about every religion. Like, he literally had a crazy like religious library where he had like religious texts from I think he probably was trying to like fill a void, but like he ended up just like becoming like a person who knew things endlessly about pretty much every religion you could possibly think of. So having Michael, when the left is really, I mean, in the U.S. at least, like very atheist oriented, because I think a lot of people that are intelligent realize that religion can be used for very bad purposes, and there's a lot of atheism that kind of follows with that. So the fact that Michael was bringing a different perspective with, and he really looked up to Marianne Williamson a lot, which, I mean, my mom was like a huge Marianne Williamson fan when she was writing those books originally, like before she even turned to the left. So there was like a very organic feeling, I think. It's a very organic feeling spirituality that kind of Michael brought with him that I didn't really see anywhere else.
Jamie Peck was on my show a couple nights ago, and we were talking about Bolsonaro. And
She never DM'd me back after she said that she would do the Harmony Korine thing with you.
Oh, it'll happen. We'll make it happen eventually. There's tons of content to make. But he was, Michael being so into Jewish mysticism, we were joking that maybe he has something to do with the shit being rerouted through Bolsonaro's body right now in some sort of like cosmic justice. He's still here with us, making shit come out of Bolsonaro's nose.
His ghost is prowling through Bolsonaro.
My theory was that, like, you have like a lot of people right now talking about like lab leak theory, and you have a lot of people talking about like the wet market theory, whatever. Like, my theory is that COVID grew originally in spores within Bolsonaro. So like the only reason COVID exists is because like it somehow jumped from like it came from Bolsonaro, and then he cultivated it long enough that it was like it could move to humans from that.
He is human body horror. Like, if you ever do Reanimator, we could like tie that into what's happening to Bolsonaro right now.
To pick up on the Michael thing, though, a bit, because everybody's been talking about the circuit he built and this community he built, but he would bring in people from the community that you wouldn't think would get along. I mean, actually, Michael and I's politics are not opposed in any way, but I had harsh things to say about Bernie at a time. He didn't really want to hear it. And he still went on my show very early on when there wasn't, where actually he was helping me more than I was helping him. And he went on an even smaller show ran by a friend of mine for the same reason, to establish links between people. And those links cultivated in a conference where Michael, I, Ben Burgess, and all met together, and basically 2 or 3 books came out of that conference.
Nice.
The one where Doug Lane was extremely upset that Jordan Peterson had spurned his debate.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the one where Ben Burgess and Michael's meet cute happened, where my name is on the board.
Yeah, actually it is. So, and because of that, I met Richard Wolff. I mean, my circle expanded greatly, and he didn't have to do that. You know, like I said, like I was kind of an obnoxious left com that most people know from the internet, and he thought the voice, the criticism was necessary to hear for a lot of people in his orbit, particularly in relation to international issues, which we were both interested in. So he did a lot in that regard, and I never stopped respecting him for it, because he also would, as was mentioned, he would keep people together and shield people from attack, and he didn't do the left beef war or the left culture war / basically rap beefs that we do now.
Yeah.
He avoided that studiously, and Jason Miles from This Is Revolution and Pascal Robert have both said that that's also part of the model why they don't do that. You know, it's open.
Yeah, they have a different way of starting shit than that. Did you see the episode Pascal did with Ben when Ben's book first came out?
Yeah.
And he was just like giving him a really hard time on like the ideological labels.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah, he did to Ben what I normally do to Doug Lane. So
I mean another person that came out of like literally came out of TMBS is obviously Brianna Joy Gray, who now kind of I don't always agree with what she says, but she had Pascal on recently, and like so it kind of feels like that's almost like another line between, you know, like on the chart, I guess, of what Michael's really managed to do. I really like, I felt like I started out as like TMBS's editor. Like that was like the first real editing job I had. But like I became like Michael's editor. Like it became more than just, because all of a sudden I wasn't just doing like TMBS. I was like, Michael would go do like an interview somewhere or something, or like he'd be part of something. Like he got me the job doing weekends when I was doing that. Like so it started feeling like Michael was bringing me along to all of these other projects and was really like encouraging me, and it felt like almost like a squire in like the old King Arthur days, where
that's a really intimate relationship. Like, you know, with I tell you, like with my producers, they can anticipate what I'm going to say, like, and beyond that, like they can, like, because I'm in their ear for hours, you know, they really understand me in a level that I think some of my friends might not even. So like you having that connection with Michael, that's really awesome.
I think too, Michael was trying, was like beginning to groom me. That sounds so weird.
There's a joke I want to make that I won't make.
You're older than him though, so
yeah, which is weird. Like, why is he grooming me? You know,
he kept saying, "Hey, you want to FaceTime at 4 a.m.?" and it got weird.
but no, like as to be his kind of squire artist in a way, like another tool in his quiver of trick arrows, because I mixed metaphors there, and we're going with Green Arrow.
You really did such a good job with that book cover too.
Yeah, you did.
It's an amazing, like, and it's so intricate. There's just so many characters like involved in it.
I just love that I got Jordan Peterson staring lovingly at a lobster.
I'm just gonna, just eat this lobster real quick. And you remember Michael's bit where he did high pitched Jordan Peterson, and he was before that one video that came out that was like think of all the cash. He did Jordan Peterson, but he was like $1 bills, y'all. That was still the most underrated Michael bit out of everything I saw way too many Michael bits because I did the 2 impressions compilations for him. So like that took months, and like Michael had a lot of like revisions that he was like, I don't think we've like hit the mark here yet, like, and then wouldn't give me like notes on what he wanted on. He's like, listen, impressions, and I'd be like, all right, and he's like, listen, impressions, just do the impression. So I think it was the first one took like 3 months of me sending stuff back and forth to Michael, and then finally it came out, and I was really like, I'm still really proud of it. The second one, now that Michael knew that was like really popular, he was just like, all right, run with it. I guess so. Let's get started on Repo Man, unless anyone has anything else to say. And there's a new way that I like that I like doing this. And I stole
May
it.
I say something real quick?
Oh yeah.
My last favorite Michael memory was on the Majority Report. Some caller called in pretending to be Jordan Peterson and made the whole freaking crew laugh. And Michael laughed so hard that impressionist was like, "And you stop laughing. Clean your room, Michael. I'm your father. I'm your father. Who's your daddy, you effing cultural Marxist?" And it's just like, it made me laugh so hard. I never laughed so hard in my life.
The other one that was really funny that happened towards the end was, remember Dave from Jamaica, who used to call in all the time? So he did Dave Rubin from Jamaica. So he called in, and he didn't do a voice. He just said, "It's me, Dave Rubin from Jamaica." And I remember Mike going, "From Jamaica!" Like he was like laughing so hard that he did the thing where his voice gets really high pitched. I don't know. It was an amazing. There's so much about that show that was amazing, and really so much that's come out of it that's amazing. Like nothing could really make you feel like, all right, like I have not done enough research on any of these like international issues whatsoever, and then at the same time make you laugh over like Dave Rubin saying something dumb, and then 5 seconds later, like within the same bit. The other one was Bill Maher, like pro Maduro. Bill Maher was one that I thought was. He was like, "He's helped the economy." Okay, and I was. I don't know. There's so many bits that he did that were amazing. That like even the ones that didn't make, like a lot of them didn't make the like even like a dent in the way that they were viewed, like compared to other things. So I was the person in charge of analytics, so like I would look at what videos were doing the best. So like some of his bits that I thought were like the most amazing ones that he ever did, like were kind of just passed over, and I was like, damn. So hold on, I'm about to get the Repo Man trailer. Andy, do you want to introduce Repo Man as a movie really quick?
Sure. Yeah, this is kind of a sequel to two separate streams that we've done recently. One on my stream on Bad Takes, and the very first episode right here on Movie Night Extravaganza. Repo Man is a 1984 cult classic with the great Emilio Estevez starring in it, with tons of just phenomenal actors that their faces but not necessarily their names. And it's a oddly funny and surreal movie, and it picks up exactly where the first movie we watched on this channel left off. If you watched Kiss Me Deadly, it's kind of a spiritual sequel to that, but it was also produced by Mike Nesmith and the same production company that gave us Tapeheads, which Forrest was on a stream of mine recently about that. So there's a certain je ne sais quoi that kind of recent viewings of films that's a follow-up to for.
Meet Otto. He's a clean-cut
I guess
kid
you're not ready.
in a dirty business. He repossesses cars. He's a repo man.
You gonna give me my car back, or do I gotta go to your house and shove your dog's head down the toilet?
His mission is to repossess a '64 Chevy, but hidden within its trunk.
What you got in the trunk? You don't want to look in there.
Is the most important discovery in the history of our planet. Repo Man. It's a mystery.
Suppose you're thinking about a plate of shrimp. Suddenly somebody will say like plate or shrimp or plate of shrimp out of the blue. No explanation.
It's a comedy.
What are you doing? Don't do that!
It's a chase. It's the forces of law.
Marlene, I'm on my coffee break.
Against the representatives of discontented youth. Against the finest minds in government.
I had a lobotomy in the end.
Lobotomy? Isn't that for loonies? Not at all.
And they're all in pursuit of a '64 Chevy Malibu from who knows where.
Wow, eyes melt, skin explodes, everybody dead.
Repo Man. The story of the ultimate repossession. Repo Man. Not just a job, it's an adventure.
Yeah, that trailer made sense in the way that Repo Man when you actually watched it, did not.
Yeah, I was about to say it actually strung the narrative together way more than it's actually strung together.
And it set the jokes up, which Repo Man very much did not do.
Mm-hmm.
I was watching it, and the dialogue seemed very, very stilted, and I was like, there's something that I want to say about this, like, but I can't like quite put my finger on what. And then they're sitting in the car, and he said, you gotta wake up at 3 a.m, 4 a.m. That's why every Repo Man I know is on speed. And I was like, okay, that's it. That's what as someone with ADHD, that's what I wanted to say about it.
This movie does about 85 things at once, and so it's kind of hard to zoom in on.
Like somebody on speed, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like somebody on heroin.
No, someone on heroin does 0 things, or maybe negative things.
Yeah.
But
I was
could be doing 80 things.
I was gonna say it's literally the last movie. Andrew introduced this movie as like a sort of spiritual sequel to Kiss Me Deadly, and Kiss Me Deadly kind of like had this box as a sort of stairway to heaven, and we talked about that the last time. This time it's like literally yeah, and it's literally a stairway to heaven this time. They actually, and they reveal it in the trailer, which is what's so surprising. Like that's the ending of the movie. So
There was that scene where they were like they were going through like the deindustrialized thing, and the car like spun out. I was thinking about when Zizek made the film. He made the movies about like a pervert's guide to film. So I was thinking about that, which is something that I think Russell's going to come on at some point soon, and we're going to watch a pervert's guide to film and talk about it with him, because he's somebody that is very close friends with Zizek. But I was just thinking about like that movie, like those movies like that, and like the pervert's guide to ideology. How Zizek just kind of walks out in the middle of it and is like, ideology. So I was thinking like it'd be really funny if he had walked out and it'd be like, a car chase. What does it tell us about the ideology of this movie? Well, let me tell you. Like
the mechanic is kind of the Zizek of this film, where just he'll have this, imagine a plate of shrimp, and then someone, say that in Zizek's voice. I do a terrible
imagine a plate of shrimp.
Like it's spot on. Like, and the thing about this film is, what's amazing about it is initially Alex Cox wanted to just make this as an indie film with his buddies. And so like, that's, I think the reason why he's like, I can make this the craziest, wildest shit, imaginable. It got picked up by a major studio, and they're like, you can keep your friends in it, but the major actors are going to be Harry Dean Stanton, Emilio Estevez. And so like, you have these real ass punk rockers in the background with speaking roles, like featured extras amidst like these Hollywood actors. And it creates so much, I feel like, the feel of the film.
The deliberately stilted dialogue and getting good actors to act like they don't really know how to act is kind of brilliant, particularly when you pair them with basically, a kind of a step above amateur actors. And it creates both an authenticity and a complete like, what am I watching exactly at any moment of the film? It's also interesting that a lot of these punk rock movies could take a very right-wing ethos, and some of them frankly do later on, but we know that
the kind of right-wing we talked about with Passive Glory, I think, which
I mean a kind of conservative nihilism. But we know with Alan Cox that isn't what he's aiming for, because we know his later movies. I mean, particularly Walker, which is about American imperialism and like the other insanity that is the establishment of capitalism in Latin America. So
I have for the end of this, I have an interview with him where he talks about his film career. There's he did a thing called Cinema Rebel, like that was the name of the interview that he did. So I wanted to play that because I sent it to Kenzo the other day, and he even goes into like the whole Trump, because I think it was around 2016, and we were talking about like the Trump-Clinton dichotomy, like really interesting thing to like have like a current iteration of his ideology like spelled out.
Yeah, I think what I think is so fascinating about it though is this movie. If you were to read it, there's so many lines that are heading in a way that we would use in modern parlance to say problematic, and then the movie will undercut it immediately. But it won't let you know until the moment it undercuts it that it's aware of how reactionary it's being. An example of that would be
the one that I comes up to the top of my mind first is when he says, he goes, "What are you, a commie? I don't want any commies in my car." Harry Dean Stanton pauses for a second and says, "Christians either."
Exactly. It's that kind of that like kind of thing
in there.
There's also one where they seems like they're going to go on a bunch of homophobic rants, and they kind of start to, and then they mock it at like the exact same time they do it. And so it's the tone of this movie is wild. I mean, like, it's also aware of its commerciality. Like, you look in the background and you have everything's replaced with white labels as a statement about product placement. So like they literally go through and replace every single label on everything so that there is no product placement even accidentally in the movie.
Yeah. And they even make sure that you know that when he goes, "Let's go get a drink." And then literally the thing says drink on it, which I was laughing my ass off.
Yeah, not even beer or soda, just drink.
Yeah. Well, he said, "Let's go get a drink." Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like a perfect line without being like an airplane style satirical, like whatever. Like, you know what I mean? It's a perfect like statement on commerciality. The other one is when he said, "Some friends you have," and he says, "Thanks, I made them myself." Which is just such an awkward fucking line to like put in there, but like since it's, I don't know what the thing that I guess I feel like most about this movie, and we kind of started to talk about this in the group that we excluded Varn from. No, but it was, I think the reason that it was just that you were not in it was because it was the one for Kiss Me Deadly, and then Kenzo bailed on us.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
So the thing that I felt like the most is that the closest corollary, I think, and I think that it takes a very different turn. The closest corollary director in the 80s to Alex Cox in this movie is Verhoeven. Clearly, like, you know what I mean?
Paul Verhoeven, yeah.
And much in the same way that he makes his amateur friends act, or has his amateur friends act, like, you know, Verhoeven is completely willing to make a bad movie with Starship Troopers is a great example of it. That, you know, if that movie had failed on all levels, like Chapo made this point when we were getting ready for that. We did like a crazy stream on Ben's show where we watched Starship Troopers with like so many random fucking people. So we watched that, and like Chapo had made the point when they did their like Lincoln Film Center screening that like it's an act of daring because it does work, and Verhoeven is confident in himself as a director for Starship Troopers. But if it hadn't worked, he still would have it still would have been an act of like, it still would have been an incredible act, I guess, of building something that or trying something that like no other director would have tried. So I feel like in much the same way, Alex Cox as a punk director has even more, I guess, license to create something like this.
I would say that Verhoeven is the parallel, with the exception that Verhoeven does one genre at a time, and this movie's like 5.
Yeah.
Like,
well, there's another. I mean, you know, we were talking about the fact Verhoeven originally got brought up by Kenzo because I guess one of the people that they were thinking about to direct RoboCop right after Repo Man came out was Alex Cox. So,
oh wow, that's
yeah.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah. So, yeah. But whereas that movie kind of tackles the entire thing is, and this is interesting. This is the fact, but everything is deindustrialized in both movies. Like, it's taking place in cities where everything has been completely deindustrialized, which is which when you look at like the Reagan years and privatization starts, like that's kind of the only place that if you had taken that to its full limit, which I think in some ways we have, fully deindustrialized urban cities would have been like the first thing we experienced, you know, and like we have in a lot of places, but like this movie kind of takes it to the level, and so does RoboCop, where it's like entire neighborhoods are just vacant in big urban cities, and you know, it's street gangs are taking over, and this movie kind of is obsessed with what's happening in Latin America at the same time. with Reagan, and has a really crazy understanding of that. Like they're constantly listening to stuff about like Guatemala and like all of the like all of the things that, because I was just listening to it again, and it's even on the radio when he's sitting there like reading the newspaper or whatever. Like it's obsession with like the Contras, which if like it's as if we had gotten the Contras here, like you know what I mean, like we had gotten death squads here, like groups of like street gangs running around from place to place, just robbing things with impunity, stealing things with impunity, murdering with impunity. So it's almost and kind of RoboCop does the same thing, I think. It's like that environment, but then obviously RoboCop creates pretty much Reagan as a joke, but like it's like Reagan era Jesus that comes and is gunning people down, which is a different thing. But like this movie kind of doesn't. This movie has exactly the same, I think, lead up to it, and then there is no RoboCop.
Right. Well, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Kenzo. I'm talking a lot already.
Oh yeah, okay. So maybe it's the fact that I recently watched A Quiet Place Part 2, and while I watched Quiet Place Part 2, the ad for that, one of the trailers at the beginning was that of Top Gun, and the first thing that came to mind was how both of those movies, in fact, like Top Gun, the trailer itself, and A Quiet Place Part 2, both kind of seem almost like military recruitment ads, and
well,
kind of something.
Everything John Krasinski does seems like a military recruitment ad.
Yeah, and like, and in fact, like this ties back to something that I think Jason said once about Full Metal Jacket, or maybe you might have said Forrest. Yeah, this is Jason, right? Or you might have said Forrest about how like all of these anti-war movies end up becoming like kind of pro-war, with the exception of, I think you tweeted Paths of Glory, which I tend to agree with. And I think that this movie kind of had this arc of like kind of these gangs of people who are not going anywhere in their lives, and then finally like achieving some sort of purpose and then taking off in a sort of way, which kind of like, I wonder if that kind of has these shades of becoming more of a military recruitment metaphor rather than some sort of like redemption or liberation or anything like that.
I think in this case, there's just an obsession with Latin America for this movie in particular, because at multiple points in this movie, I noticed that they're listening to stuff about like Honduras, Guatemala, like that's getting brought up a lot, which at the same time, obviously, like Iran-Contra is going on, like literally at the same time. You know what I mean? Like those hearings are happening, and there's a knowledge that Reagan is funding these death squads, and that in Latin America, like literally for the last, and there's also like I don't know, like less than a decade before that, the church committee hearings, like there's an understanding that we fund these street gangs that run around in other countries. And I feel like what this movie and what RoboCop does is like it takes the idea that these street gangs are running these, but more of this movie than anything, like it kind of transfers it to our society. Like we have these people just running around with guns, and there's just no, like it's like a libertarian paradise.
Oh yeah.
Because if you're someone that's obsessed with making money, like a Repo Man would be, or you're obsessed with like getting the money that, you know what I mean, like for literally taking someone's property, or as Harry Dean Stanton says, protecting, like it's like, oh, I make sure not to harm property, like like it's 100% that you're kind of living in this weird like libertarian crime state. But when you look at what Reagan was doing in all of these Latin American countries, it's literally the same thing. Like he's funding these crime states.
And like Harry Dean Stanton is such a good representative of like just trusting the system, like, and believing in the system. Like he didn't really assign moral value to the people that he repossessed cars from. He just says, they're just a poor hump who couldn't afford their, I forget exactly how he put it, but like couldn't afford their car payment. And it's our job to take the car. It's their, it's the cop's job to do this. Like he just lays it all out, and that's why he doesn't want communists or Christians, because either way you're putting, you're questioning, the integrity of the system to him. So I think that, that was a great message there, like that for the time, deindustrialized America. What jobs were there other than, working for a bank, taking shit from people who can't afford it, who've been, had the American dream shoved down their throat, that they had to, buy a car they couldn't afford. And, even beyond that, in LA, you can't really get around on public transportation so well. So like the car was important to people. So
and there's a moment in the movie that I wondered about, that I guess I want to hear you guys' take on when for the 1 second Emilio Estevez pretends to show like that moment of kindness to the woman that to the black woman in that house, and he says Mrs. Parks. Like, was that supposed to be like society has become so dystopic that he's literally like, because she's like, oh, I finally got a car, and it seems like maybe possibly a wink to like Rosa Parks, as like, you know what I mean, and like the idea that like maybe they'd even take her car after, because it seemed like there was a weird moment where he's like, Mrs. Parks, like I've decided I'm not going to take your car, like, and she's sitting there and she's like nodding along and she's like, thank you. And she's like, he's not going to take the car that we just acquired. And I was wondering if that was like a Rosa Parks, like society's kind of gotten to the point where like even like Rosa Parks like is fair game for the Repo Man. Maybe I'm looking too much into it. I don't know.
Well, I think if you're going to name a black character Mrs. Parks in 1983, 1984, that's it's hard to not make the analogy. I mean, that's only 20 years prior. It's, when I watched this movie, I remember it being explained to me as dystopian, and then I was like, but it is just an exaggerated version of 1982, 1983. I mean, like, we tend to forget this, but there was actually like a kickback recession from the 70s recession going on in the early Reagan administration, and there really weren't that many jobs. And the beginning of stuff like televangelism, so like when he walks into his parents to try to con him out of money, and they've already been conned out of money at a much larger scale by the church.
By a televangelist.
By a televangelist church, specifically. Not like generic, but specifically a televangelist church. And you can just see him like, he just has this look like, well, shit. Like, there's nothing. He doesn't even really have a response. You expect him to be cruel because he kind of is most of the time, but it's just like, well, it's just the way it is. I'm going to have to get the money some other way.
A corollary to, I mean, obviously this movie came later, but Starship Troopers, where he's like, I want to go to Zagaba Beach, and or he's like, I want to join the army. And Dad's like, you're going to Zagaba Beach or whatever. Like, so I don't know. I kind of felt like that was a funny connection, because it wasn't, because obviously that movie came out a decade later, but like it was funny to see those two scenes together. He's like, I want to go to Europe.
I thought it was a really interesting choice that the parents, they didn't make like stodgy, like evangelical looking types. They were hippies.
Yeah, they're like completely acid destroyed hippies, which sets you up for later that like the Miller character is kind of the same thing. When he's like, if you do too much acid, like, but I think that, well, I'll let you say what you were going to say about it, but I don't think it's necessarily that they're referencing evangelists. It's that people are so burned out at this point by the 60s, I think, and like and by that entire culture, which is something that it feels like Alex Cox is kind of steeped in. Like the 80s version, I guess, of that culture. Like he's doing all these punk movies and stuff. Like it's kind of evolving into like a different thing, obviously, but like it's the counterculture. But he seems it seems like they've been so steeped in like getting burned out by the 60s and like by acid and whatever else, that like they're just unable to, like, they see something on TV and they're like, yeah, we're just gonna do that.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was thinking too. Like these are folks that were just carried away by whatever the trends were at the time. But like carrying over the hippie style, I thought was cool, because it just showed how like this is what happens. Like it's not necessarily like Family Ties where like hippies all become liberals. Some hippies drift off into the other cult space. Yeah.
I mean, they kind of still aren't. If you look at like who can you predict is going to become QAnon? If they have like hippie past, it's almost like a 1-to-1 bet. You can flip a quarter.
Do you want to hear something very funny?
Yeah, sure.
So there is a guy in my town that is a slumlord that I lived at his place. The place he owns that I lived at was called the Groovy Blueberry. It was a store that purely sold tie-dye and like all of these like different like hippie stuff with crystals. But the guy is very much a reactionary Trump Republican. But I think libertarian enough. Like he sits outside of the apartment that we were living in as a fucking slumlord. Everything was falling apart upstairs, and he's like sitting outside smoking weed in front of his store with like his buddies or whatever, like by the river. Like bought the most. He's trying to sell it now for like $4 million or something. Like everybody in my town hates this guy, but this guy is like he's like a hippie libertarian slumlord baron. Like that's literally what the guy's created for himself.
Yeah, like the QAnon shaman. Like that is a type.
Yeah.
That is a type of person now.
Yeah, but this guy I think goes even farther back. This guy has his roots in like because we were talking about this with the anti-war movement and Lorax was on, and the episode hasn't come out yet, so I guess spoilers for our episode. But it's next Tuesday's episode because I'm not going to be around to do a I don't know. I just have other stuff to do, so we're going to do the Past the Glory one and debut it that week. Unless you want to go to patreon.com/movie night extra and get it now. But so we were talking about how the anti-war movement, one big way that they had failed is that, libertarians for very different reasons are anti-war. And they kind of created like this like new left libertarian hippie type. And it's been covered so much in different things because they like the new left, I feel like, and I was thinking about this morning, like the new left had given up so many of their principles. Like, you know what I mean? Like, number one, we're in the Cold War. So like, oh, we need to differentiate ourselves. Even like Michael Harrington, we need to differentiate ourselves from communists. Like DSA started because of that. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing, but that was very much in reaction to, well, yeah, all right. I'd see. I'm just saying that was very much, I'm not passing any judgment either way. I'm just saying that was very much in reaction to the Cold War happening at the same time. You know what I mean? So like everybody, like anyone that used the label socialist had to differentiate themselves from the USSR. And at some point you'd given up so many of your principles as a leftist. The only thing really left was, I don't want to go to Vietnam. And then all of a sudden libertarians were like, I also don't want to go to Vietnam for different reasons, but like, I don't want to go there. And you've created like this hippie archetype of like a free, like, I'm just free, man. Like, I don't really like, there's no real principles to it. There's no anchor. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like you're anchored in anti-capitalism. You're anchored in aesthetics, and you're anchored in the idea that like, oh, we should just like all fuck, pretty much.
It's basically the original Red Brown Alliance. It's what the boomers are all afraid of. Is the left uniting with us. Like, motherfucker, we ain't doing that. That's what y'all did.
You know what's interesting about this though is, you want to talk about countercultures. This, I mean, as much as Alice Cox clearly loves punk counterculture, he has a pretty strong critique of it as being like not only nihilistic and hyper selfish, even more selfish than the hippie movement. And I mean, I think about like the aesthetics of early punk in the UK, and like, in some ways they were the original Trolls. Like, they would go and break disco records, but they would also wear swastikas on their armbands. Not even to identify as fascist, just to piss off people who fought in World War II. And I mean, so like John Lydon's current politics, for example, don't surprise me as an extension of that. But it does seem very much there's a continuity between, Emilio Estevez as a punk and Emilio Estevez's auto as a proto yuppie. Like there's a continuity there too. And it's not just like the hippies, the evangelicals. There's also like these punk guys can easily become nihilist in ties.
Yeah,
Like,
and that kind of, I mean, I know you don't necessarily like the term, but I was talking to Catherine Lure this morning, and don't worry, I said some people on the online left feel that there's a Marseille critique where maybe the word class shouldn't be used in the PMC. That was the first question that we talked about. Don't worry about that. But no, we were kind of talking about that, and in Virtue Hoarders, she very much draws that line between hippies, like that like the counterculture and hippies and yuppies. Like it's the the PMC concept kind of that she's kind of defining is a group of people who have combined those two ideas. Like they're willing to do the work of yuppies that are above them, but they also have like the same libertine expressions as the hippies really did.
Yeah, the yuppies is Jerry Rubin, Abby Hoffman.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting because I've been, doing a lot of research in the early 20th century, and that countercultural stuff being like we could easily go ultra bourgeois while romanticizing the very lowest strata of society. That goes back to at least the 1920s, maybe even earlier in America. So there's like a long history of that. But this movie's interesting in that it's aware of it at a very early time to be aware. I mean, like, punk's not even a decade old when he's making this. So, like, you think about the earliest, like, self-conscious punk movements in the UK would have been middle 70s. So, and we have to remind ourselves, before the internet, pop culture was slower.
Well, it was 76 when punk really started in England, because that was when the Ramones and Johnny Rockets and the Heartbreakers toured England, and that had like a major effect. In fact, the bass player for Johnny Rocket, no, not Johnny Rockets, I did it again. No, Johnny Thunders. Johnny Thunders.
Yeah,
Johnny Rockets is the dagger, but Johnny Thunders. His bass player was Richard Hell, who used to be in television, and he was keeping his clothes together with clothespins, with a safety pins, because they were just falling apart. And so, like, somebody in England was like, "Oh, it's brilliant, mate," and started, like, cutting up clothes and putting it together with safety pins. So I mean, really, like the punk movement is taking, in a way, is almost like poverty porn of Americans. Because punk began here in this country.
Yeah, but there was a longer, at least in the UK, like the mod skinhead wars at the end of the 60s, where
I mean, that's
split, and it's people just beating the shit out of each other at, like, shows, like trying to stomp each other with boots. That kind of very quickly turned into like the punk movement, I think, because they already kind of had this weird, like, back and forth like battles going on with these two groups. So I think when Alex Cox creates these, like, groups of, like, brawling people on the street, I think it has a much earlier thing than that, and that kind of it reminds me of a kind of a Clockwork Orange in some ways. Like that subplot specifically is a lot like a Clockwork Orange, especially when the one guy says like oh, you're afraid to go in the trunk, and the other guy's like, oh, well, you're out of the game. That's clearly a reference, I think, to a Clockwork Orange, which is coming out like in the 60s and has like these roving groups of street gangs. Now I think that the punk aspect of it obviously comes in later, but I don't think necessarily that the punk aesthetic is the most important part of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's whole proto-punk, which existed long before punk, because I mean, you had everything from the Velvets to the Monks to to Iggy Pop,
And Iggy was on the soundtrack to this.
Yeah, that was like their big hit. That was the big single off it.
What was interesting too about the selection on this soundtrack is, like, you have, Fear, which is a right-wing punk band. I love them, but they are, they will say that they're reactionaries. You have Suicidal Tendencies, which were like basically the Cholo street gang punk band of the time. Circle Jerk, political. Black Flag, political. But, like, yeah, the interesting scene was when they're in the lounge and the Circle Jerks are playing as a lounge act, and then Emilio Estevez is like, I still like this band. I think that was a little dig into the sellout culture.
Well, also the bass player of the Circle Jerks is in the movie too. Remember, he was was it Kevin the Nerd?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not playing this yet. I just wanted to. Like this is Iggy Pop talking about how he ended up being on the soundtrack to Repo Man. So I found this because Criterion Collection, I guess, has some great interviews after we found out the other day about the Past the Glory ones. Like they interview, like they do the deep cuts, I feel like. But this is how that came about, I guess.
This is a movie that I understand why it got a Criterion Collection, but I wouldn't have predicted that it would get a Criterion Collection release, because it's raw. Even for an Alex Cox movie. I mean, if you see like Sid and Nancy or Walker or those movies they're particularly Walker's just as crazy, but it's a lot more polished than this.
Do you want to do Walker for a stream like in the next couple of weeks? Like I haven't seen it, and there's that interview where he's talking about it, and now I'm like super curious.
Walker's great.
We should do Sid and Nancy. I haven't seen
Alex.
Good one.
personally came to my extremely humble apartment, which was just up the hill from the Whiskey A Go-Go off Sunset Boulevard in 1984. He was as large as the roof of the room, this very large young British guy with not particularly great British manners or anything. And he explained to me about the film he was making. And he said, I want you to do a song for me. Do what you want. And at the time, I'd had a hiccup in my career due to my wild lifestyle. I was
both star in a row,
sort of on the ropes, and was not making much money, was not on a major, was needed some breathing space. And I was living in an unfurnished efficiency apartment in Hollywood with a Japanese girl who couldn't speak English and a futon and a Stratocaster guitar. So I've done a lot of this kind of work since, and it's very, very rare that for something as finance intensive as a film, that anyone will give you a carte blanche opportunity like that. It was like a gift from God to express myself. It was just wonderful.
I don't know why Iggy Pop was dressed like Fabio, but
he's got like the weirdest swag whenever he's hanging out in his back garden.
Yeah,
I just love it because he's like, like, oh, is this my bathrobe or my wife's or girlfriend's or I don't know. He'll just put it on and just
Iggy
like walk
Pop,
around.
Did you do too much acid in the 60s?
You did too much heroin.
Yeah.
I love the story where he just was watching the monkeys on mescaline, and he's like, we need a clubhouse. So he just starts digging in like this burnt out section of Detroit to build a clubhouse, and he like did that for 12 hours straight.
He was in pretty much every, I mean, like the early Jim Jarmusch movies. And my dad like knew Jim Jarmusch somehow. Never really explained, like had to do with architecture, going to see his house that he had designed, or his apartment that he had designed in the city in like the 70s or something. So, but we always had like this weird, we always like I had a Dead Man poster in my room like long before I had even seen that movie, because my dad was like, oh, don't worry, like here's a movie poster for you. You like movies. Like he had this Jim Jarmusch, like that's a guy I met swag whenever he watched one of those movies. But yeah, he was in Coffee and Cigarettes. Yeah. But he looked, I mean, like, but that's exactly, he looks rare.
The streams have crossed.
The thing about the stilted dialogue, by the way, in Repo Man is, last night I was hanging out with one of my friends and she had never seen The Room, so we like watched the rest of The Room, and after like I rewatched Repo Man today, and like the dialogue is stilted in the same way that like it's kind of funny that like obviously it's written that way purposely, but like in Tommy Wiseau's brain, like I feel like that's the way the dialogue comes out. So there's something really funny about watching it be like, by the way, like imagining Harry Dean Stanton played by Tommy Wiseau.
Oh my god.
Oh hi, Otto.
I could see Harry Dean Stanton just kicking his ass, like just telling, you're not going to tell me how to act.
Well, that's what he did in this movie, actually, because he got in fights with Alex Cox. He couldn't stand how the movie was coming together, and would get in fights and almost quit several times. So fortunately, he stuck around and made such a classic. But
yeah, but then you listen to an interview. You listen to so I gotta watch this after the stream, but it was like 22 minutes, and I found it like at the last minute, so I didn't have a chance to watch it. There's an interview where he's talking to an interviewer about Repo Man, and his literal like organic conversation sounds the same. They're like asking him like if he wanted to ever direct a movie, and he's like direct, and he's like, I worked with like he's talking about like he worked with Scorsese and he worked with Francis Ford Coppola, but he was like saying it in such a disjointed way that I was like, this sounds like Repo Man dialogue. Like it's weird that this is how you talk as a normal person. Because the first movie I ever saw him in was Pretty in Pink.
Oh, not the Avengers? No.
But I always think of him like when I see him as Molly Ringwald's dad, living in Chicago.
Shermer, Illinois.
I also wanted to ask, like, in terms of seeing portraying the punk culture, I feel like there was equal parts kind of parody of it and like kind of not just making fun of it in like a kind of way that's like just ripping on it as a person who identifies with it, but also almost like showing Emilio's character arc as almost like a rite of passage, that he used to be a punk and he's like no longer a punk and he's becoming something else. Maybe he's becoming the Repo Man, and that's basically what the transition is like, that you from being a punk you become a Repo Man. So
I don't want to be a punk no more. What, you gonna be a skinhead? No, I want to be a rude boy like my dad.
I would say he's moved on from his greaser look in The Outsiders. That's fun right there with Amelia.
More than identifying with it, I think Alex Cox is probably like the premier punk director at the time. At some point, like, because he had done like a bunch of projects. He did the thing with the Pogues. He did obviously the Sid and Nancy like one before that. Like he kind of was the most. It's interesting to see somebody kind of parodying their own genre, because it's a genre that I like. How many directors? And I mean, I don't know this like the number, but I'm saying like how many directors were doing this kind of specific like punk documentary.
And he also did this as a comic book. Before there was actually a script, he had a comic that he drew, and it got shown around, and Michael Nesmith saw it. And this was how Michael Nesmith brought it into his production company.
I'm gonna jump into this. This is the interview that I sent you guys a couple days ago, where he kind of talks about his whole career. But it's
I didn't see this.
Oh, I sent it to that group message, but it's funny he's wearing that. It's funny he's wearing that hat, and he's like a British guy. But anyway, so this is like they're talking about like his career. Obviously started with, okay, so I guess Repo Man was first, but like he ended up becoming like the premier like because this is where he got famous. I know that, but like he became like kind of the premier punk director. And I mean, it's funny because I don't think necessarily, I mean, I think punk can kind of be a lot of different things, because it's just like the rejection of authority doesn't necessarily have to be a left-wing rejection of authority or a populist rejection of authority. It could be just a restructuring of existing authority. So like this movie very much ties into that and critiques it, when it's kind of like, first he's like, oh, I don't really like Repo Men. Fuck Repo Men. They repossess people's stuff. And then he's like, oh, I kind of need $25, so I guess I'll become a Repo Man. Like, so it's this like, I don't know, like the rejection of authority. And I think this is true, honestly, with global protest movements a lot, because when Hong Kong erupted in protest, and there was like, there was a lot of people that were protesting there about lack of democracy, but also we were funding like let's try to overthrow the Chinese government protests in Hong Kong. So it's like that rejection of authority could take a direction in both, in both directions.
I mean, didn't we fund Castro?
The kind of the trailer itself kind of gives it away, where it says it's the ultimate repossession, and it's kind of an interesting way to look at it, because what they end up doing finally is that they do repossess the car, and except this time they get to fly it. So it gets me thinking about like, so what's the kind of flying, and like that's why I kind of made the connection to what would be like the cult classic of the 90s, to even be a mainstream hit, which is Top Gun, that like, it kind of introduced a whole kind of romanticism for like airstrikes and kind of pilot fighting from planes and all of that. So I kind of wonder.
Otto was calling people ace long before Top Gun was. The idea. Right. He was like, yeah, let's do this ace or something.
I feel like Emilio Estevez in this movie was literally every other Tom Cruise character in the 80s. Like every Tom Cruise character in the 80s was literally this person who had no self and had just like a one purpose kind of like I do this thing and this is all I am. It's
Yeah.
like Popeye the Sailor Man kind of one note character, and that's why it's kind of fascinating to see what that character's interpretation of becoming a repo man would be, because what would that character find to be like a sort of culmination of their identity? Like is does he care so much about anything? Like, so what does he really care about? And I wonder, because I don't know if that was really clear in the moment where they, so to say, achieve the final like liberation or emancipatory kind of thing that happens, which I would not reveal the nature of it, but when it happens,
you can reveal the nature of it. Like, I don't think
they drive the car, and instead of driving it flies, right? And it's the alien car. And so what happens? What is that? And I feel like that flight can immediately that discussion could basically unearth the politics of this movie itself, because depending upon how you see that flight, it becomes a different interpretation, I feel like.
Let's watch that last scene. I think,
and then we can yell and about great whatsits and whatnot.
Yeah, because I want to keep this to like an hour and a half tonight. I feel like we've been going really long with these, so
yeah, we're gonna go longer than the movie.
Yeah, so I feel like maybe we should keep this an hour and a half tonight, and just watch this last scene, because I think it's great. And
yeah.
Holy sheep shit! Read this book. Diuretic. Chapter 7. I got verse 3. Miller, what are you doing? Going for a little spin. But you don't know how to drive.
What about our relationship? What about our relationship?
Fuck that.
Tell that girl to shut up.
I'm a loner, daddy. A rebel.
Best goddamn car in the yard. Wow, this is intense. The life of a Repo man is always intense.
There's so much about that scene that's amazing, but also reconciling it with everything prior is difficult, because that car kills people the rest of the movie. Like, and it's actually hurting people then, but Emilio Estevez is chosen not just by Mechanic Dude, but also by the car, I think. And I was actually, what does that mean? I actually don't know what it means that the car chooses Estevez as the passenger.
I don't
Yeah, he's
necessarily
definitely
think that this is anything that they're commentating on, but it's really funny that we've had a lot of, like, one of the most controversial inter-left issues is nuclear energy, like whether or not like that kind of energy, which doesn't leave as much of a carbon footprint, obviously, but also like a leak in any kind of tower can totally decimate a place. So there's been that debate going on for like decades. Like, is that an energy source that we kind of want as a transitory one? And it's funny when Harry Dean Stanton's sitting in the car and he's clearly like fading away from being like having atomic energy all over him and like literally like dying of some kind of cancer or whatever the fuck you know what I mean, like his end comes from, and he's like sitting there and he's like, oh, that's all, like no, like that's not true. You can have like 100 like MRIs or whatever, like X-rays a day and you would still be fine. And clearly that's not true, but it's kind of a funny debate when it's like, oh fuck, like this car is fucking radioactive, and he's like, nah, it's fine, and he's clearly dying. And after watching like so many different intra-left debates on that, I'm like, it's pretty, I don't know, I found it funny because it
Like,
kills me, because it's the same thing. I mean, yeah,
a dog on fire and saying this is fine.
yeah, but it's also
his haircut,
the
though?
fact that, like, I mean, it's been a debate for decades among environmentalists, like whether, because you know Chernobyl happens and like that kind of thing happens, you know, more than it should, but at the same time it's something that doesn't pollute the environment the same way, and at the same time it's something that ends up it can literally just destroy like an entire city or like a small country if it, like, you know, if you drop a fucking bomb on them, like. So it's
or
like
a tidal wave. I was in Korea when Fukushima happened, so yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like terrifying, but it's also like, you know, there's a scientific consensus, I guess, that's a little bit different. It's like, oh, this could actually like save us in the meantime while we're waiting for these other technologies to catch up. But then at the same time, like, you look at Fukushima or Chernobyl and you're like, this could also wipe out like an entire city of people if it fucks up. Which is
so at a more fundamental level, you're looking at power then, basically, more than just like any form of power or any form of like this type of thing is good or bad. It's just like essentially evaluating whether you get to have this much power or not. And then, like, I mean, what better way to encapsulate that like than by showing flight, right? Like a human being able to fly is like it's like, say, the definition of a superpower, and like a flying car is like doing that job. But like at the end of the day, I think I come back to what Varn said, which is the fact that the car is a killing machine. So if you were to view it that way, then you're essentially equating the power of something to the power of a killing machine, which is basically, it has done nothing else but that. And so to think that it can actually do anything else, it kind of, you know, it's like we're kind of rehashing these familiar territories of like looking at the US as a force of good, etc., etc. So if it has never done anything but destruction before, can you ultimately see it as a force of good? And like Emilio and his friend seem to, you know, think so, especially the friend, because he's actually the most, you know, the trippiest character in the whole movie. And like for somebody like that to reconcile, like, what does he say? It's a very famous, not famous, but like a very catchy line, the lattice of something that he says, lattice of coincidence.
Oh yeah,
that he says, yeah. And
by
he's talking like,
by the way, fuck that character, because his last name was Miller, and he's like, oh, I don't drive, and like I'm literally learning to drive now because I had, you know, I was in a car accident when I was like younger, when I was learning how to drive. No, but it's like my friend was a car, like, but I was in the car, and like it really like gave me like permanent problems. But like he's like, I don't drive, man, or whatever. He's like, you don't drive. And, like all my friends, every time I say it, they're like, you don't drive. And I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Billy doesn't drive. Like,
I never really looked at an environmental angle on this, but like it does show that you know, how we're you know, the American dream is killing us. Like the fact that we want to be, you know, atomized, every family or every individual has a car instead of having a public transit system. You know, Harry Dean Stanton, I think, you know, he's a good narrator for that, you know, being the lone wolf on the road. And at the same time, like we were saying, like everyone owning a car is killing us in many ways, like, you know, literally in some ways, and also over time environmentally. So I think that, I mean, that's a layer until this conversation I didn't even think of.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's nuclear as a concept.
Nuclear?
Like, nuclear. All right, I say it weirdly, okay?
It's all right.
You know, it's
all right, yeah.
but it really is the most incredible double-edged sword that we've ever created. I think. I mean, at least if you're somebody who's like for that type of energy, and you're someone that cares about the environment, and you think that, you know, because we're like solar hasn't caught up with us, and it hadn't in the 80s, and solar was very much like something like it got to the point in the 70s where Jimmy Carter had put solar panels.
Yeah.
On the White House,
and this was like 3 years after Reagan took them down.
Yeah. So it's something that like could be something that like literally saves us, according to the people that are like its disciples, I guess. But it's also a thing that's managed to like level an entire city, like, or like, you know what I mean? Like both if it fucks up, and like the fact that like, you know, we have bombs that we make out of it. So it's something that really is like one of the few things that we have, which is the purest form of power dynamics, I guess. Like, is it going to be used for good or is it going to be used for bad? There's very few things that can level an entire fucking city. At the end of that conversation.
What was up with Emilio's hair at that end scene, though? He really is coming from that like greaser look to the Outsiders. That was his punk look, to be honest. In the Outsiders, that greaser, you know, leather jacket look, and then going from that movie, yeah, very much. Like going from that movie to this kind of like, I guess you'd say like kind of crew cut, like flannel wearing businessman, or whatever you want to call it.
Well, I think both Emilio and the car are going through like evolutions in the story. It's almost like they're like Pokemon, and the car reached its final form where it becomes like a flutter car or something. You know, where it's finally safe, but it was in its middle volatile form where you know it can do great damage to both the Poke controller guy person trainer. That's it.
Is it finally safe though? Because the last moment where his eyes are literally glowing with like with like green energy kind of was something that kind of fucked me up, because like it's like he's literally radioactive at that point. Like it doesn't seem like he's safe in that situation. It seems like he's taking a chance, which when he was you know, when he decides to become a Repo Man in the first place, like he's taking a chance. Like with a very dangerous, what turns out to be a very dangerous job, which he thinks is obviously an authoritarian job because you're literally just taking people's property. But like then Harry Dean Stanton in the, you know, the best, I guess not best, but the most abhorrent libertarian terms is like, I don't harm people's property. And it's like, yeah, like you harm people before you harm their property. I get that. But like, you know, so it kind of feels like he's kind of willing to take that leap, as if it means killing himself, which is an evolution, I guess, because at that one point when they whip out the guns, he's kind of freaking out about the fact that there's guns involved, which is kind of funny because his like best friend or whatever later is like, I kill people, man, or whatever, and like, I see you working around for that part of it.
Well, I mean, it is interesting how many people like his punk period is actually hard to tell how sincere it is too, but it is also to compare the two tracks. The punks randomly kill people as well, and it's random. Like it's if you're in the liquor store at the wrong time and they're in a bad mood, like half of everyone in the room dies, including half of them.
They're cruel to the point of being sociopathic. Like
the bad punks. It was interesting.
Out of control.
Really bad punks. They were part of this this concept called the Quincy punks. That like in the 80s, this show called Quincy ME or MD, I think. It was a show.
There's a big difference.
It's Emmy. You got it right.
Well, they had like, you know, they had one episode where they just hired a bunch of of punk rockers, and it was like a moral panic episode where it was like these punk rockers, they were almost like trauma filmed, like that level of evil, just in like comical, and or like the movie Suburbia even.
Yeah, I was about to bring up Suburbia. That's another one.
So you have like, you know, that kind of, you know, that what was part of kind of what mainstream culture looked at punks, and then you had Emilio and kind of the more, I guess, moderate punks in the film.
I wanted to end on an Alex Cox. I mean, you could go, but I want to kind of set this up before we end this. I wanted to end on I'm going to put up this interview, which happened during COVID, I guess. So it was within the last year of Alex Cox looking back at all of this and kind of talking about like where his politics are now, which is at an interesting point. But anyway, you can finish what you were saying, Varn. I wanted to put that up.
I was just interested in how like this movie doesn't spare anybody. Like the girlfriend is also like she tortures him to get information about the car. And they seem like they're nice liberals for a second who are also involved in conspiratorial. I guess also in the 80s, I've like conspiracy theories did not explicitly have the right wing valiance that they have now.
In the 2000s either, or the 90s, or literally a few years ago.
Or even right now.
Right. But they're shown as also, they don't seem sociopathic. They seem to care about society, but they actually kind of don't. And all she really wants to have is access to the car. And so, no, there's not any, like, Cox doesn't give you anyone to glom onto as a good character to, like, to be on side within the society at all in this movie.
But I also think, I mean, I kind of drew a corollary between this movie a lot of times and Clockwork Orange, which is, you know, like a British kind of at the start of the, you know, this kind of dystopic mod skinhead, like, you know, whatever, like street gang almost, like fights on the streets in the UK. And there's kind of like a corollary between like the liberal, like the liberals in Clockwork Orange turn out to literally be trying to kill Alex. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's the older professor guy that's like more reactionary, I think, than like almost like the conservative politicians. He just wants to use his death and drive him to the point of committing suicide. So there's kind of a corollary with, you know, you expect in that movie that the older liberal professor seems very humanistic. Like, I'm not even going to say he seems like empathetic. He seems very humanistic. And then all of a sudden, you know, Alex is kidnapped and jumps out of that window. Spoiler alert to Clockwork Orange. I hope people have seen it after having 50 years to see it. But like, you know, like it's like at that point where it's, you know, it seems like this movie is in conversation with a lot of different movies that led up to it. And that really do lead up to the punk movement, I think, because I think Clockwork Orange, more than anything else in the 60s, leads up to that, a lot of those concepts. But so I thought this was interesting. This Alex Cox with this mini glowing Malibu, but I guess I think the author is pretty liberal, and he is not liberal maybe, but he's nihilistic for sure. So during the current events of such bleak times with Trump's ego, it's quite a coincidental parallel of a delusional leader going forward in the name of democracy. Would you ever have expected such a parallel? And he's talking about, I think, Walker when he says this, but he's like pushing for healthcare in the United States to be more adequate. Like he's saying, like it isn't Trump's fault the U.S. has an inadequate third world for profit healthcare system. When he tries to do something sensible, remove the U.S. occupation forces from Afghanistan, he's thwarted by the Democrats. I'm not a victim of Trump's derangement syndrome. Democrats and Republicans are equally bad. And he like continues on with like all of these interesting, extremely like nihilistic comments, I guess, about, you know, the two parties in the United States and the concept of nuclear war. So one of this is with nuclear war being a prevalent theme in Repo Man, even appears as a newspaper in Straight to Hell. What was it like to meet the creator of the neutron bomb, who was a fan of Repo Man, apparently, which is, I guess, makes sense if he's literally his character from that. He was insane. He received a medal from the Pope for his services to world peace. He showed me the medal. So the Pope was insane too. Obama committed $1.2 trillion to U.S. nuclear weapons upgrades, received the Nobel Prize, insane also. I don't know. So it's like he's an interesting like populist figure, I'd say. You know, like anti-authoritarian, very much like against authority, which is kind of what the punk movement is. It's interesting though that the punk movement could go either way. You know, like it. So he's kind of made a name for himself after this as like the #1 punk director that could possibly exist. And you know, I don't think I need to read about him talking about COVID or whatever, but like, you know, it's an interesting time to have had that to have this conversation. I do like how can actors act without being to shout, weep, fight, and hug each other? Only way of a safe vaccine can we get back into our groove, which at least, you know.
At least he's saying, yeah, vaccine.
Yeah. But
vaccine from X is a little way off the farm right now.
I think that, but I think that they're, and I've talked about this a lot in different contexts, but like in the 80s and 90s, especially in filmmaking, but like in culture in general, I think everything takes kind of an anti-corporate bend, an anti-authoritarian or authority bend, but doesn't necessarily find a way to fight against it. Like it doesn't ever really provide a solution where it's like, here's the solution for how we get out of this. It's just like, all right, well, there's somebody like higher on you in a societal hierarchy. Fuck them. Like that's why there are so many songs in the 80s and early 90s about like they're like, oh, me and my parents just don't see eye to eye, because that's like the most you know, for people that are living a privileged lifestyle, like the most authoritarian force they could think of, I feel like, is their like parents. You know what I mean? Like Will Smith being like, parents just don't understand. Like
my favorite one's actually on the soundtrack.
And so, but so they never really provide a solution besides fuck authority as a general concept. And I think that's interesting because like very much as we're in this neoliberalized state, you know, like anti-authority messages can be subverted just as quickly as pro-authority ones. Like, you know, like you could do an establishment shakeup, which is what Trump basically was. Like it was a shakeup to, at least in people's minds, like they were voting for him, like a shakeup to the establishment as a concept that just put the same people from like Reagan's administration back into the government.
So the kind of framework in which this filmmaker is especially talking about, I think, is from what it seems like a libertarian kind of individualistic person who takes care of like a group of, like as a sort of leader, a sort of libertarian leader, it seems like, because if you scroll up, like there's a place where he speaks about what his advice is to young filmmakers or something like that. Scroll down a little bit, sorry. This answer, like what hardships under the control of film production companies did you face that aspiring filmmakers should be cautious of?
Well, I don't think he was talking about a libertarian leader. He made
I kind of the reason I'm getting to that is because I feel like the politics of filmmaking, especially because, as you pointed out, how can you really like be opposed to have an anti-capitalist or an anti-authoritarian anti-authority even point of view while you're being a Hollywood filmmaker who is totally dependent on the money that these people are going to give you to make these movies in the first place, right? So the kind of way that I feel like filmmakers I have seen in history kind of overcome this obstacle is to kind of have this sleight of hand where they'll do a movie that kind of can play both ways and can trick even something like Spartacus comes to mind, like it's starting right from there. And I feel like this filmmaker is definitely like dealing with something like that. But at the same time, it also has its limitations, right? Because at the end of the day, he is admitting to that. I think I was never able to raise money there again and stuff like that. So it does seem like it's a waning form of interest.
He was saying that he ended up doing the punk stuff because he couldn't, like Hollywood studios weren't helping him, so he was kind of, I think, financing on his own. I think that's a more filmmaker specific. I mean, I get the point you're making, and I agree on a lot of on other levels, but I think in this case, he's kind of like, oh well, I was fortunate the fact that I was making controversial movies and then wasn't getting funding anymore from it. But I think that I don't know.
To answer your question, I mean, I don't know if you asked this as a question, but the way that you framed it, which is that a filmmaker doesn't really have the wherewithal to really even oppose the machine because they're ultimately dependent on the machine to fund them. And I feel like the answer to this is this filmmaker and a bunch of filmmakers like that. I mean, even somebody like Steven Soderbergh or even so, any of the people who made independent movies post like the 90s, even like Quentin Tarantino, all of these guys like come to mind who I think operated on the same Kevin Smith also comes to mind, like who operated in the same framework. Like,
Kevin Smith there's nothing anti-authority about anything Kevin Smith has made. I mean,
true.
Just in the framework of like, I'm gonna get a bunch of money and we're gonna make a movie out of it, and I'll make the budget so small that like we'll be able to make a good movie, etc. But that's the most that we can ask for, because the fact that we get this thing made is a big deal unto itself. I feel like whatever politics we get into it is the most that we can ask for, because this movie itself will not be made otherwise, or something like that.
I mean, I guess I feel like something like Sorry to Bother You, not necessarily that it did anything to our culture, but like movies like that can be made now. Parasite, I mean, not here, but like, you know what I mean? Like in other countries, like class conscious movies can be made. Like, I think that I don't think necessarily that's doing anything to our society as a whole, but I think we are at a time when people are starting to realize that there is more than just like wall thrashing. Like, I think that there's like a very populist wall thrashing type of movie that comes out of even like Verhoeven's stuff, as prescient as some of his movies are in the 80s and 90s, where it's like, listen, like, we don't like authority, we don't like this privatization, we don't like corporate ideas, but like there's nothing really past that we can really say. Like, we're kind of just pointing it out, like we're holding a mirror to it, which is what culture does best. I mean, when it's like at its most countercultural, it just holds a mirror to something and says like, look at what's going on. But I also think, like we were talking about this with Paths of Glory, like an anti-war movie at this point needs to literally have them leaving the war. Like, there needs to be something at the other end of it. And I feel like a lot of times in dystopic 80s and 90s stuff here, especially like sci-fi, like it's like, oh, this sucks. Like, here's what this country could turn into. But there's never really like and here's how we get out of it. Like, it's kind of just like, look at this mirror society, like, fuck this, like, fuck all these power structures, which I think in the punk thing really is how people become like right-wing or libertarian punks, is that they're like, you know what, it's, and you're seeing it right now too, like with, I mean, and as much as we started out with the show talking about how we like it, like even like Glenn Greenwald, like this kind of desire to restructure the power structure, and anything that breaks that kind of is a good thing, which it's not. But like, there's this kind of idea that just the restructuring of the establishment is going to be enough. Like,
I don't really strongly believe in generational politics, but I actually do think that the fall of the Soviet Union and Reaganism affects a lot of these people, and it is not a mistake that Greenwald is actually of a similar generation as to when this movie would have been viewable and released. I've been following Greenwald. I've been following Greenwald since I was a right winger almost 20 years ago. So like, this actually isn't new for him. This is a long trajectory with him, and that's fine. Actually,
he supported the Iraq War, right? I mean, at one point, like he
turned against it early. I mean, and he's always been great on international reporting. But there was a sense, I think, if you tried to look to the Soviet Union in the 80s as a way out, no one, even outside of the West, would have taken you that seriously.
No, like even people in Russia wouldn't have taken you seriously.
Yeah. And if you tried to pivot to the CCP at the time, also wouldn't have taken you seriously, because that's the moment of liberalization. I mean, so it really did probably seem like, I mean, you want to talk about capitalist realism, it probably really did seem like there was not any real alternative to any of this.
And getting into the 90s, like, it gets worse, because, you know, we have the end of history idea, which I think really did permeate more of culture than like we give it credit for. I mean, a lot of people bring that, you know, that essay up, but like, it's funny that you turned to a Bernie bro in like the 2020s and like admitted that like it wasn't the end of history, but like, you know, but like that kind of idea that like everything that had happened had already kind of happened. You know, the Soviet Union fell, and that's like, that was the big thing that was going to be like, you know, like one type of society won out, the other type of society fell, and like at this point we're just kind of which is back to the PMC thing, I guess, managing conflict. Like these national conflicts that come up between countries, like we're just kind of managing them at this point. Like, you know what I mean? Like, or like something like Bosnia happens, and like we bring troops in there, and like there's a dictator that's like, everybody in the moment can agree, like, oh, like this person's evil. Okay, well, we're gonna topple them. Like it becomes this easy good and evil struggle. So I think that I'm not knocking that idea. I'm just saying that I think that it's permeated things to a point where it's really hard to find any movie from this period that doesn't just hold a mirror to society and say like consumerism is bad. Corporate interests are taking control of everything. That's bad. Like, look at this mirror. And I was thinking about this when I was talking to Catherine Liu earlier today because I watched two movies that were like Chinese movies, Wrath of Silence for our conversation, and I watched A Touch of Sin, which were both extremely class conscious movies in a very different way than anything that we have here, because they have an understanding things were at one point collectively owned, and we don't have that. It's not like we're like, oh wow, like the workers co-op got overthrown by a corporation, how can we fight back against that? It's like, oh wow, a small business got overthrown by a corporation, how can we fight back against that? But at the same, Republicans very much, and the conservatives and whatever reactionary capitalists exist, are very much in line with the fact that like the interests of small business on a small scale is very much their interest. It's just not fashionable to say so anymore. So like you kind of have like this, wow, corporations are really like taking over everything. That sucks here. But like overthrowing the corporation and then another like more, let's say like quote unquote ethical corporation takes over is not a solution to that. And nobody's really, because I think, the Soviet Union had been toppled and it clearly wasn't an option at that point. Like, and neoliberalism was everywhere. It seemed inevitable, even in places that had like thriving left traditions for a long time. It came like I was talking about France the other day, and how like even when France had socialist leaders, like they were still imperialist. Like it was socialist imperialism. You know what I mean? Like in France at certain times with Mitterrand, like it number one, he was the one that fucking had Thomas Sankara killed, and number two, like there was the turn to austerity that happened in his administration because
that's what they're saying. Neoliberalism happened with a deal with the Communist Party. I mean, like that's
and it becomes and the Communist Party was like toppled there during that because his coalition fell apart because it just seems so inevitable at this point that he dropped his own he voluntarily dropped his own agenda. Like, so it's very much being put into this, and the idea that like, all of these things have kind of been toppled and this is the only way forward. And like the only I guess criticism is like, oh, well, look at these corporations taking over everything.
I think if you're going to find movies that actually posit something other than capital, you have to watch genre movies. And this is kind of a genre movie, but you're going to find it in sci-fi and fantasy movies. You're not going to find it in standard, even artistic films. And I think it's obvious the reason why, because like in genre movies, there's plausible deniability and it isn't considered serious.
Yeah.
Like that's why Snowpiercer is probably more radical than Parasite even. I mean, like
we talked about this during Annie's birthday stream. This exactly syncs up. Like, and this goes for this movie, but like not exactly. The only way you could really criticize things was making it so absurdist that like the only satirical way you could really do things, because it really was this one conception that like things were this way now. Like the only way you could really criticize things, people didn't want to hear it after decades of like even stuff like Parallax Views, where it was like we didn't trust our government anymore. People didn't really want that. So the only way to really criticize something and put light to it during the Reagan years was like to make it so absurdist that it became like that you were looking through a fictional lens, which this movie does too. But like, I mean, RoboCop is a great corollary of that. Like that movie, if you look at it now, is like, holy shit, Verhoeven. Well, Verhoeven, I guess, claims that he didn't really know that much about U.S. politics at the time because he had just come from, he was Dutch. He had just come over to the United States like 2 years before that. I don't necessarily believe that because I think that movie's too well made for him not to know what's going on. So I think that's bullshit. But it's like the fact that like it needs to be something sci-fi and absurdist to even criticize like the dystopic nature of what's happening around you in that moment. So I'm not saying that I blame those filmmakers. It's just interesting that now, I mean, with something like Sorry to Bother You, like you start to see a return to this like 40s and 50s style pro-labor, like a pro-labor like alternative in some senses to the consensus that we've developed in the last 30 years, which still was not far enough, but like at least it's a return to that type of filmmaking.
It's going to be interesting if we continue to see that in the near future. if we're more likely to see 1,000 more Black Klansmen.
I think we're likely to see both. Like we're likely to see more Sorry to Bother You movies made like by in an indie setting. We're also likely to see far more Black Klansman movies. Like you know what I mean? Like that kind of woke neoliberal thing. Because look at this fucking Spike Lee's Spike Lee just did that stupid Bitcoin ad. Like Spike Lee's not going anywhere. Like and his conception of like even like nationalism is like is a very like one that's like a black capitalist conception of nationalism. Like he's not the only thing he would be changing is the color of the people who go up that ladder, I think. And
it feels like through globalization the United States was at least like the neoliberal aspect of the neoliberal wing of the United States culture and politics at least seem to be interested in like cultures and countries around the world. But now with like I feel like a lot of trade deficits and things like that, like especially I don't know if you saw this kind of, I don't know if it was like a kind of map that showed China gaining in trade percentages and stuff like that. I feel like the reaction to that is going to be a version of the kind of dropping bombs with the pride flag and the Black Lives Matter logo type stuff, and that becoming a form of nationalism unto itself. So I am like definitely more pessimistic on that front because I feel like we're likely going to see more Shonda Rhimes than Spike Lee even. So and that's definitely more like disorienting than optimistic.
We're gonna see a black 24 reboot where it's all just like
in
black
this age of reboots.
Like we're gonna say just like all ages, like beat the shit out of Arabs. It was like, oh fuck, like
did we already get a Black 24 reboot though?
I think we did. See, maybe they'll make them right wingers, but it'll be for liberal capitalists. I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I think my cynicism came from, we had a year with very little film, but the films that were made were all indie and kind of interesting. But one of the ones that was supposedly class consciousness is Amazon propaganda.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to feel good about where this is going because it's being recuperated relatively quickly.
It's weird that the conversation that I had about film this morning and this conversation are literally like syncing up in that way because we're talking about Nomadland and the difference between Nomadland and like even like dude, it's kind of crazy. Like I mean, it's not crazy in the fact that like I mean the Maoist conception of the working class obviously glorified it to an outrageous level at some points. But like the interesting thing about like Chinese filmmakers and Chinese artists understanding intrinsically that like privatization is happening in China and has been for decades, and like understanding like a far more class conscious reading of what that leads to at the very least than what we had. Like watching that movie A Touch of Sin was fucking insane. Literally every single it was just a bunch of disjointed scenes that had come from actual Chinese newspapers where privatization and economic deprivation led to extreme violence. Like throughout that movie, literally, I felt like the first. I don't know. I think everyone should watch that movie now that I've watched it. I'm like a converted about. No, I'm not. But no, but I was very drawn into the fact that the first story in this is that a mine had been privatized, and there's like there's a working class miner that's running around that nobody takes seriously when he's saying like the corruption is real here, like, and everybody does the same thing they do here, where it's like nobody was taking him seriously. Like his sister or whatever was like, oh well, you're just jealous that someone else like decided to become a billionaire before you could be able to take that leadership role, and like everybody's just not taking him seriously. They won't send his letter to President Xi, and this is before there was a harsher crackdown, I guess, on filmmaking in China, and they won't send his letter anywhere. Like everyone so he ends up just grabbing his fucking hunting rifle out of the closet and going and literally with his hunting rifle killing capitalists. Like he goes first to the guy that's like the bureaucratic person, like the village like council leader or whatever, blows him away. The second guy is like, or the second person, like he just goes around, just starts eventually going to the person that owns the mine in this village and just blowing his head off. and like he's just sitting in the car like smiling and he's fucking killed a capitalist, and it's fucking sympathetic as fuck. Like when this guy's running around screaming like there is no justice, and I'm like, holy shit! Like as a leftist in the U.S. that has like spent his whole life understanding how privatization works, like because he had to get pushed over the edge. Like it's not like he started out as a violent person, but like this messaging that like that the understanding that because this is a real like story that had come out in Chinese newspapers that I read this morning, like they killed 14 different people that were involved in this like privatization thing, and eventually got executed by the Chinese government. Like the understanding that like this privatization and like corruption of it isn't taken seriously by anybody else, like that it leads to violence because people get so desperate, and obviously maybe that's the most extreme version, and I'm ready to stop after this. I just wanted to say like maybe that's the most extreme version, but you would like even in Booch Riley's like crazy most crazy acid trip mind, like let's say he wouldn't have capitalists literally get their head blown off. That's the last thing I wanted to say. Anyone have any last thoughts, and then we'll get Kenzo out of here and us out of here and everyone else, because I really
let's start with Kenzo since he's the one who does the bounce.
I just thanks for having me on. This was great talking about the film. I don't really have any thoughts beyond what I already shared, but yeah, this has been fun. Thanks, Forrest.
Yeah. Anyone else want to say any last?
I love this movie. I think everyone should watch it. I know that we talked about it, but there's actually you could spend 5, 10, 20 a week talking about all the different things that come up in this movie and anyone's seen. So I would tell people to check that out. And
it was a really good movie, and that's why it's really hard to like when it's a movie like this like log off, because it's like there's more stuff I want to say, but I'm gonna close it there. I think this was a fun stream. I give it 2 thumbs up, including one that's fucked up from getting caught in a scooter. So, all right. Well, left is best.